Bonjour, my name is Beko Pin, and I'm reporting from Brussels in Belgium. I'm precisely at the Europa building. That's the seat of the European Council, because we are covering the official visit of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. here in Brussels, primarily to attend the commemorative ASEAN-EU Summit. It's the first time that two blocs are meeting as the two blocs. Of course, ties already exist between ASEAN and EU, and we'll be talking about the importance of those ties later on. So we've been here since the 12th, early morning, the 12th of December, flying in via PR001, covering the president and his engagements here. Yesterday, he joined the Business Council, or the Business Summit rather, of the ASEAN and EU. The day before that, just one activity on the day that he arrived here in Brussels with the Filipino community here in Belgium, although may mga ibang Pilipino din from other countries na either nag-drive papunta dito or nag-train papunta dito para makasama doon sa meeting with the Filipino community. So yung andito ngayon, actually ongoing, as I'm talking to you live right now, ongoing yung plenary kung saan you have representatives of the 10 ASEAN nations or Southeast members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Not all of the countries are represented by their heads of state, although we did see, aside from President Marcos now speaking actually before the ASEAN-EU Summit, is Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, who is also the chairman of the ASEAN, kaya siya nagsalita ngayon. Andito rin ang Thailand's Prayut Chan-o-cha. He's the prime minister, of course. He also saw Indonesia's Jokowi in attendance here. Yung ibang countries are represented by ministers or similarly ranked officials. Andito rin representatives of the 20 members of the European Union. So throughout this plenary, we expect all members of ASEAN and all members of EU to make their manifestations or to speak, to kumbaga ilalatag nila kung ano yung stand or ano yung position ng country nila with respect to the issues that the ASEAN and EU, the two blocs, want to tackle in this summit. So bakit nga ba may summit? Also pala, syempre yung in attendance din Charles Michel. He is the Charles Michel rather. He's the president of the European Union. So yung mangyayari today, yun nga, magkaka-formal plenary sila, tas magkakaroon ng family photo, the usual things that you expect from the summit. But I think beyond that, let's talk about why nagkakaroon, bakit may summit, why all these ASEAN and EU leaders even bothered to converge here in Brussels. At its core is really ASEAN and EU wanting to improve ties, primarily economic ties between the two countries. So usapan dito yung free trade agreement between the two blocs, although yun parang it's in the pipeline. It's a long time dream that, of course, the two blocs and the members of the two blocs have been wanting, but negotiations are still ongoing. But even so, while hindi pa na conclude yung negotiations for that proposed free trade agreement, the EU does have existing trade agreements or of varying engagements with the different members of the ASEAN bloc, so individual member states na. Bakit importante to? Of course, the EU, parang kumbaga, if you think about it, ASEAN, individually, yung members ng ASEAN, iba-iba yung bargaining power nila. Some countries under the bloc are much more powerful and much more influential than others, but as a bloc, it'll be, in theory, yung kumbaga collective power ng ASEAN bloc to negotiate certain terms with the European Union, of course, another huge and important bloc in the world, in the world in terms of politics and the economy na rin, ano. So the EU's goal specifically, like they've nilatag nila to as a bloc, is to establish a bloc to bloc, so ASEAN to EU, a free trade agreement. The ASEAN is EU's third largest trade partner outside of Europe and also outside of the US and China. So I discussed this, or this is one of my points of discussion with Jed Robena or Aaron Jed Robena, talking about why ASEAN is pushing or is growing to be such an integral partner or an integral force in the world economy. Kasi nga, parang as a result of the past 3 years of lockdown because of COVID-19, and then on top of COVID-19 and the lockdowns caused by COVID-19, you also have Russia's war on Ukraine. So as a result of these, of a pandemic and of the war, globally nakita natin yung weaknesses in the supply chain, nahihirapan yung mga bansa to source their materials, leading to difficulties in the economy. And because of these realizations, because of the pandemic and because of the war in Ukraine or Russia's war against Ukraine, countries are looking, and also dagdag pa pala doon bukod sa war in Ukraine, bukod sa COVID, the effects of the COVID-19 restrictions, the escalating tensions between the US and China, countries and blocs are looking at other partners. Kumbaga, parang mas nararamdaman yung need to go beyond the usual economic and trade partners. And ASEAN is one of those partners that they are eyeing. And of course, ASEAN wants to capitalize on this, not just the bloc, but of course, the individual members of ASEAN will want to capitalize on this. Okay. So that's it as the broad strokes of the ASEAN-EU Commemorative Summit. Si President Marcos specifically, he is here in Brussels, or he will be kasi mamaya aalis for 3 days. It's a pretty packed schedule in that although the first day isa lang yung event talaga, hours after his arrival, we arrived here around 3 in the morning, just before 3 in the morning Brussels time. And his event was around 6 p.m. Brussels time. Yun nga yung Filipino community event yesterday was primarily with the ASEAN-EU Business Council, and today, of course, is the plenary, the commemorative summit. But on the sidelines of these events, he has 10 bilateral meetings scheduled, primarily with, well, all of them actually are with European countries. So these include Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, Spain, Denmark, Germany, Poland, Finland, Netherlands, and the European Union. Yung EU na meeting, actually, parang long time coming na ito, if I recall correctly, as far back as his third rather, or second trip abroad for the ONGA in New York. The president was scheduled to have a meeting with the EU, although it didn't push through. He was scheduled to meet the EU again in another trip abroad, pero ngayon siguro matutuloy na talaga siya. That's 10 meetings that will be squeezed into one day. Earlier, before coming to the Europa building, Marcos did meet with several Europe-based corporations, including Unilever. You can check out the live blog after this live. I'll be updating kung ano yung kinalabasan or ano yung mga points of discussion ng meeting na yun. He also met with other European corporations, including one that handles sustainable energy or renewable energy rather. Sorry, ang lamig dito eh. Nag-freeze pati yung brain cells natin. He also met with a European corporation that has to do with trade and logistics. So all in all, ito, again, this has been the Marcos administration's mission, and whenever they, or stated mission, specifically when they travel abroad, it's really to create ties, to seek out business opportunities for the Philippines. Of course, the context being it's been a difficult 2022, not just for the Philippines, but for the rest of the world. Again, economies trying to catch up or trying to recover from the past few years of lockdown because of COVID-19. So other things that happened as a result of Marcos's meetings here in Brussels, magkakaroon ng advisory council in order for the Philippines to comply with the European Union standards for seafarer, for the safety or the safety training of our seafarers. Kasi if we do not meet this deadline, we stand to lose yung accreditation na yun, and there's a chance that our seafarers take up a lot of the our OFW sector, or our trade exports in the Philippines. Kumbaga yung mga tao na lumalabas para magtrabaho at nagre-remit sa Pilipinas, we stand to lose a lot. So, yung resolution and as a result of a meeting between owners and operators of trade ships yesterday, yung pinag-usapan nila magkakaroon ng advisory council. The advisory council would be composed of Philippine government agencies, as well as the owners of these ships and these agencies that do employ seafarers, to make sure that we do comply with EMSA. Kung baga sabi nga ni Marcos, no, although he didn't give specifics kung ano ba gagawin natin, ano bang meron ba tayong dramatic na proposal or policy change, but he just said that wala tayong choice kundi mag-comply, which is, well, it's true. If we don't comply, Filipino seafarers stand to lose their jobs. Another point of discussion, or another result of a meeting that he had, was with after a meeting with Brussels airport officials. Philippine Airlines, our flag carrier, kumbaga nag-start na yung discussions to have a direct route from Brussels to Manila and vice versa. The idea being Manila can be the point of entry for tourists and even business, those flying out for business, point of entry to ASEAN. Kasi nasa gitna tayo, although we are separate from the rest of ASEAN. And the same goes for Brussels, although sa Brussels naman, connected sila by land sa lahat ng all other European EU countries. So yun yung more or less na discussions that those that have happened and will happen in the next few hours, because President Marcos will be flying back to Manila today Brussels time, right before midnight, and he'll be in Manila by Thursday evening. That's the 15th of December. Also, minor detail, yesterday he was scheduled to have a press conference with media from the Philippines, and traveling media, but he did not show up because he was losing his voice. He wasn't feeling super well daw, according to House Speaker Martin Romualdez, who is also his cousin. It was Romualdez who actually spoke to us on behalf of the president. Sabi naman ng Malacanang, he's not particularly down or sick, but he wanted to preserve his voice because he does have a lot of speaking engagements today bukod sa plenary ng ASEAN-EU. He will also be participating in a press conference because the Philippines nga pala is the coordinating country between the two blocks, so ASEAN and EU. So sabi ng DFA nga, not specifically President Marcos, hindi naman siya yung mismong nag-broker ng discussions, but the Philippines played a huge role in the mounting of this commemorative summit. So he will be joining Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen and officials of the European Union in a press conference later this afternoon, mga siguro 2 or 3 hours from now, Brussels time. And tonight also yung gala dinner, although that one, socials na lang yun for the leaders of ASEAN and EU. And speaking of socials, I think yung parang what ties this trip together, or the overarching theme of this trip is really, which was actually spelled out by Speaker Romualdez, is that President Marcos wants to, the quote, the term that Speaker Romualdez used was to re-engage. This marks the Philippines' re-engagement with the European Union. Again, a huge block, a very important block in terms of trade, culture, for the Philippines. So, ang tawag nito, re-engagement, syempre yung underpinning or context nito is that our ties under the previous administration, who, na ironically, kumbaga, President Marcos was a he was considered as the de facto default continuity candidate of President Rodrigo Duterte. If you recall, ties between the Philippines and the EU were kind of awkward under President, no, that's an understatement, under President Duterte. Bukod sa President Duterte had very explicit distaste for the Western powers. Kung naalala niyo yung parang yung so-called pivot to China, independent foreign policy. So and also as there's like a lot of things, and I'll probably will try to link this story. I'll chat it to our producer. This was a story that was written by my news editor Paterno S. Makel in 2017. Wag na lang pa natin i-tweet ulit. Pero if you want some context as to, you know, parang bakit kailangan mag-re-engage ng Philippines sa EU, there was sentiment before that the Philippines needed to do damage control as a result of the pronouncements by the former president. So yun yung parang that's the underlying theme of President Marcos's visit here, to really reach out and kumbaga announce to the EU na here we're re-engaging with the bloc, we are re-establishing our ties. Kasi kung isipin mo, it's 10, he's set to have 10 bilateral meetings in the course of one day. That's quite a short time for bilateral meetings, diba? So malamang most likely those meetings won't last for more than an hour because he needs to meet a lot of people in a very, very, very short amount of time. Also, another thing that's happening between the Philippines and the EU, like nabanggit ko nga, no, wala pang free trade agreement between the Philippines and, between the ASEAN and EU, but the EU does have existing agreements with individual members of ASEAN, and we are one of those. In fact, meron tayong we have may GSP plus status tayo. What does that mean? GSP plus is the generalized scheme of preference plus. As a result of our GSP plus status, we have incentives and we have zero tariffs on over 6,200 Philippine products. Now, the thing is, yung status na yon, ilang beses ng European Parliament, they threatened or they warned the past Duterte administration, if it doesn't respond to concerns over yung human rights violations connected to the drug war, the bloody drug war of Rodrigo Duterte, ibabawi yung GSP plus. Although we have to note that it didn't actually do anything to trigger the revocation of that status. Pero again, itong pagbigay ng GSP plus na to, parang conditional siya, kumbaga, to a country's compliance with certain human rights standards. Hindi lang yun ini-impose sa Philippines, but in other countries as well. That expires in 2023. So that is something that the Philippines will definitely want to keep, because if we lose that, parang kumbaga magsasanga-sangayan na problema, maapektuhan yung producers from the Philippines. Again, 6,200 products. Although in a chance interview with President Marcos before he lost his voice, before he got a cold en route to Brussels, he did say that the quote was, I don't think one thing should be related to another," referring to the GSP plus status and human rights issues. But again, that is the kumbaga conditional nga yung pag-award ng status na yun by the EU, so long as a country adheres to certain human rights standards. So that is it from me here in freezing Brussels. Just for context, the temperature right now is, I think, let me double check. Good old AccuWeather. It is 0 degrees here in Brussels. What time is it in Brussels now? It's 2:09 p.m. And before I go and say goodbye, I'll walk you around where I am right now. So ito nga yung Europa building. It is the seat of power ng European Council. Yung parang administrative arm or executive arm rather ng EU. Iba pa to sa European legislation. So if you can see behind me, here, right there, I can't see my finger, right here, that's the red carpet that you see there. That's where the different ASEAN and EU leaders entered earlier before the plenary started. This is the Europa building. Can't really see how nice it is from the outside, from the inside. You can't see how nice it is from the inside. So that's what's happening now. And here I'll show you also, because we aren't allowed in the actual plenary venue, obviously, for security and space reasons. But behind me, that's That's how we monitor what happens in the plenary, even if you're not allowed to go inside. And yeah, that is Indonesia's Jokowi behind me. Well, not behind me. He's on the screen behind me. And that's it for now from me here in Brussels. Again, this is the president's last scheduled foreign visit for 2022. He's been around quite a lot in his first 6 months in office. He has been to Indonesia and Singapore. He has been to the US for the UNGA or the UNGA. He's been to Cambodia for ASEAN and Bangkok for APEC, and now Brussels for the ASEAN-EU Commemorative Summit. And then next year, he does have a a state visit to China scheduled early in January. And Speaker Romualdez did tell us na he has confirmed his attendance, or he has expressed that he will be attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in 2023. That's in the mid-January next year. So early next year, President Marcos will be flying around once again. There's one thing we haven't discussed, although ito bukod na siya sa ASEAN-EU or EU-ASEAN Summit. By the way, interchangeable yun depending on who talks about it. Like when it's the EU, they say EU-ASEAN. When it's the Philippines talking about the summit, they say ASEAN-EU. So same thing. Another thing that we didn't quite discuss, although it's not directly connected to the summit, is the Maharlika Investment Fund. Speaker Romualdez spoke about this during his press conference with us yesterday, talking about how the president, the president said this na the idea came from him, or the idea came from the executive branch, and now the legislative, specifically the House of Representatives, is rolling it out. So we'll find out more about that. Wala ding commitment pa from President Marcos to certify that legislation, that bill, as urgent, therefore allowing it to skip the usual long processes of Congress. So, yun lang for me na. Actually, magsalita na si President Marcos. So, I'll see you around soon. And again, bye guys. Thank you for watching.